Welcome to Rural Reboot. I'm your host, Sage Goodwin, and today I'm joined by Jeff Wendland. How are you doing today?
Great, thanks.
So, who is Jeff Wendland?
No, I'm not really sure, but let's see. I have a life of work in education, most of it in workforce education. I've also worked in overseas operations. I'm currently assisting or project managing for an online training platform that we're developing for medical assistants.
Okay.
Actually, medical assistant apprentices. The medical, we put the classroom component of it together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. So you have a very storied history in terms of workforce development, something that we didn't know until more recently when we got to talk to you a little bit more at one of our local tech nights. And as soon as we heard that, we're like, okay, we should have this guy on the podcast. Could you talk a little bit about workforce education?
Sure. Workforce education is hard. There's the types where you just send somebody to community college to enhance whatever their portfolio already is. And then for me, it's been more about low-income adults who don't really have a career direction yet and giving them a building block to get started on that. The history of workforce education has really come about largely since the 90s, when a lot of government money has been pushed into it and a lot of, unfortunately, corporate money has been taken out of training and development.
Okay.
So, but there's some success with it, but even to this day, I think most projects have had a hard time moving to scale. And that's kind of the important piece when you're putting a lot of taxpayer dollars into something, is that it's effective for a lot of people and not just one-offs. So we're still trying to figure that out.
Yeah. So when you talk about scale, what are some of the things about the scale that is the issue? Is it just because of there's so many different kind of backgrounds of the people going and looking at these workforce
education? I think so,
education?
and I think low-income adults face a myriad of issues, struggles, and other roadblocks that they just need to overcome. And we don't have to go into all those roadblocks, but it makes each individual's circumstance and needs very different. So what is the training component that you can provide en masse in short term so it's affordable, but also so that those individuals can go back to work quickly, because they're missing out on a paycheck sometimes when they're going to training. That's what makes apprenticeship so appealing, is that there actually is a wage while you're an apprentice, and that's a big deal. So anyway, I'm very much about trying to figure out how to make apprenticeship, which is also very often in small doses or small numbers. How can you make apprenticeship more scalable? And that's what I'm working on right now in this online medical assistant course.
So one of the things with the area, we have a PTAC grant, and part of the things with the PTAC grant, historically you had to have a single large tech company, and then that people would intern at, and you had to have a separate building from your school to house the PTAC students.
Yeah,
that's something that had to be reworked for this area. But one of the biggest proponents and a lot of the money that was pumped into that was from IBM, who had this large scale with their internship program. What is the difference between an internship and an apprentice for workforce development?
I mean, there doesn't have to be a lot of difference, but an internship, often you get to set up your own parameters, whereas an apprenticeship, the amount of work hours and the whole structure really needs to be approved by a state apprenticeship board, right? It's not as self-governed by the employer. And so they can be similar. An apprenticeship also includes a classroom component where usually, right? Whereas the internship doesn't have to have that room component with it. Right? Hopefully they're both paid.
Yes. Yeah. Where do you see the strengths of apprenticeships? Because this is something that we as humans have done for hundreds of years,
right.
And it seems to have disappeared in the last, I'd say, maybe 30, 50 years or so.
Wow. And as it disappeared, if I editorialize for a second, I think it just became a little bit cumbersome bureaucratically to set these up and go through these state boards and commissions to.
Okay.
So my history actually is more in Seattle.
Okay.
Where I have done a lot of workforce education and workforce development work. I was the executive director for the Seattle Jobs Initiative before moving this direction. But apprenticeship, it's not easy to get your apprenticeship through, no matter what the state board wants to tell you. There are a lot of hoops, and so it's and who can do it best or is able to do it. It's what organizations to run it. It makes it hard. It's cumbersome.
Okay.
I think that's why it's become less over time. But I do think we owe it to the workers and the future workers to jump through whatever hoops necessary, because it's really about the best model possible. You're also talking to somebody who's much about active learning as opposed to in-class learning is not as much my strength. So I really appreciate
I am right there with
active
you.
learning.
I too am someone who learns more whilst doing versus sitting in a classroom and absorbing that information getting tossed at you. So looking at kind of going back and going a little bit deeper into your backgrounds, what are some of the experiences that you've had to get you to the point where you're working in this new education platform?
My background involved living overseas a lot and working overseas a lot, so it's like remote work. So that certainly plays into currently providing project management remotely for this project. But, if you work in a system long enough or on and off in a system like I did in the Seattle workforce education system, you develop relationships that lead to your next job. So we've been building our own house remotely up in the mountains, and we were sitting in our trailer one day and somebody tracked me down from Seattle and said, I need you to help out with this. So I'm helping out. That's, it's what I can do remotely right now. I think if it was more involved and the management of it was more involved and not just doing coordination from afar, I'd probably have to be a little closer to the setting. So remote work is interesting what you end up choosing as opposed to, well, do you want to still be an executive director? Not as easy to be an executive director remotely. You start to take on pieces of things as opposed to the whole shebang.
Where do you see remote work having impacted both globally and in rural areas?
Having impacted me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, the advance in technology is impacted, me and my ability to do that. I remember all of the VPN sessions when I was living in Guyana or Guatemala with headquarters in Washington, D.C. And I guess, remote work has just allowed me to work in places that were more interesting to me than, being in a big city. So I guess that's my biggest impact is I'm very interested in where I live right now up in the mountains.
Yeah.
Being, having my own space, but also living other places where I can be impacted by the cultures that are in those other places has been a big part of my work over the years. And so without some of the technological advances, if I was still back in the 90s, I'd be relatively disconnected when I was overseas and working. And now I can be engaged with people around the world in a way that actually can move projects forward. And that's helpful. I think it's really also nice for companies who are engaging with a remote workforce is that they can kind of choose from you're not choosing a specific locality.
Mm-hmm.
That's not necessarily, I understand the direction of this grant, that we really want to empower this locality.
Mm-hmm.
But it does really lend a new lens to recruitment for companies. And
you have a more global workforce that you can pull from versus I was just having this conversation with a friend of mine who works remotely for a large tech company and does network operations, which is very easily carried over into remote work. They've actually had a rise in productivity over remote work versus in the office. And we're having this conversation about Apple historically had you have to be in Cupertino, you have to be in these set locations. If you're not there, you're not getting hired. And they've relaxed that rule, and they're able to attract a lot more innovation because you have people that want to live wherever they want to live, and they still want to work in their desired field. But if they can't find work and they want to live somewhere, they're going to choose where they want to live versus the job that requires them to do so. Where do you see that affecting you, having this wide history of going into these overseas areas and working in these sometimes remote, sometimes not locations?
I mean, I would like to, when I finish building this house, which is taking all my time, I would like to manage a project or direct a project. And so, I would probably intend myself to be rather local to where the project is.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it impacts me in that I would want to hire individuals from, all sorts of locations to increase the diversity, the skill level, and everything else, and have a team that I could work with. I also think that it lends very well to individuals who want to work with lots of companies or groups, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that they're working on contracts, so that a lot of times you don't have as big of a staff portfolio, and management of staff as opposed to management of deliverables is hard. It doesn't matter where you are. People have unique needs, and
that is a very good way to put it.
Keeping them all happy and productive is the biggest challenge for any manager. So when you're dealing with what you're trying to get out the door and not all of the human drama, you get productivity. And you don't necessarily, it's a good thing to have people on staff if it's for benefits and, quality of life. And there are a lot of people who want to work that way. There's a lot of other people who don't necessarily want that kind of tie to an organization, want to take care of that themselves and incorporate that into their hourly or whatever contract you have.
Yeah, we've seen in the last number of years a rise of gig workers, and the gig economy has definitely boomed through the last, I'd say, probably decade, maybe, possibly more, but definitely in the last decade, we've seen such a rise in gig working and this empowerment of people to kind of look at themselves and say, what do I want to do? What is this? I don't necessarily want to sit at a desk all day. I may be able to find a position where I can have a lot more impact on myself, maybe have a better quality of life, but also still be able to pay the bills.
Yeah. And I think there are people like that, their identity is wrapped up in themselves as the business person, as opposed to a company.
Yeah.
A lot of us have trouble joining as much as, we have no problem putting out wonderful products. But for me personally, I don't want to join that often. It takes quite a company to make me want to join.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
then that is definitely one of the things that we as a society are learning about ourselves too.
Sure.
It's just being able to, instead of, we have a lot more freedom of choice, I'll put it that way.
Right. We just have to figure out the business models associated with being gig workers so that we're not completely taken advantage of. So I think I would consider myself a gig worker currently. Yeah.
So going in and kind of going a little bit deeper in terms of your current your current state, and then some of the past experiences, where do you see gig work, remote work tying into workforce development?
That's a hard question. This is going to take some editing. The type of workforce development that I've been in has been for low-income adults. And for low-income adults, you're trying to create a little bit more stability.
Yes.
And gig work doesn't necessarily always tie into that. It might be something that individuals do while they get training or otherwise.
Yeah.
But I think that would really be about small business development and helping individuals who are ready to have their own business learn about business models and how to do that best so that you can survive, because starting a new business is very hard.
Yes.
If somebody comes to me low income and says, I want to start my own business to support my family right now, and we look at the business model and the profits are, or stability's 2 years down the road, it might be a both and approach, right?
Yeah.
Learn about how to have a business, start developing this business on your own, and also here's a skill or a career that you could transition into based on your current
build that
skills and
foundation to
abilities.
build on top of.
Right.
Would just kind of looking into the crystal ball a little bit here, do you foresee a time or a place where inside of workforce development, workforce education, there is that education aspect into how a small business is run? An investment in maybe a pitch contest or an accelerator, just giving the groundworks for that to give people an idea of, hey, this is also something that you may be able to do once you get more stable.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of grants out there for small business development right now, and it is a small part of workforce development, but it might be a little bit stuck 20 years ago as opposed to what's currently needed. Some of the models are match oriented, so matching the money that you bring in through other other donations and such, and that can be cumbersome as well. Again, some editorializing. We've put a lot of money in workforce development into training projects that either weren't directed to who or didn't end up being directed to the individuals they were for, or just weren't that effective. We have tended not to want to give out as much funding directly to individuals who had their own vision. We wanted to create a bigger, something that caught a lot more individuals. Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not certain that we wouldn't have been better off directing some more direct funds toward individuals and what they needed, to have a truck to deliver, a truck that worked to deliver flowers or whatever they were doing. We did some of that, but the matches, which the match dollars often became very, very cumbersome to engage in those projects. So I wish that, if I was looking into a crystal ball and I had to tell government what to do, I'd say make it easier so that more small business direct dollars could go out. And I don't think that always even has to be loans. If it's about business and having more small businesses that thrive and get off the ground, certainly, direct grants would be a lot of help.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So another question I have, and we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier here, but a question that here is, how does your background relate to rural tech initiatives and the rural reboot process?
I think that my background just kind of stems from coming from a rural background and growing up in a rural background and wanting to return to a rural background. My wife is engaged with the Rural Tech Reboot, so that's a piece of it, and so our family certainly benefits from that happening. But I understand and hope that what the Rural Tech Reboot can do is bring local individuals into the technology that's being developed right now, and it enhances the current jobs they're doing. It enhances their wages. It enhances the ability of individuals in this community to make a living wage, as opposed to it just helps individuals like me who are educated, who just wanted to get back to the country from when they were kids.
And it's a multi-pronged approach too, because you have to empower the local workforce and give them an opportunity. But you also have to offer ways for outside money to come in as well.
Sure.
So that's kind of a big thing too, especially in Colorado, where the boom is. So many people are moving to the area, whether they're from the East Coast or the West Coast. There has been such a huge transition from many other places to Colorado,
right, because
of the wonderful quality of life we have here. What brought you to rural Colorado?
I grew up in Nebraska, and I spent a lot of my time with relatives in Colorado as I grew up. So it's somewhere I've lived more than once. This is like my third foray into living in rural Colorado.
Okay.
And it's changed over the years too. Like the first time I lived here was in the early 90s.
Okay.
But yeah, the culture,
well, what have you seen?
The changes?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's in line with the current political climate that I don't want to get into, because I think it's too toxic. But I notice it, in the countryside especially. I think it's also in line with people not wanting to join, so it really lines up with the Rural Tech Initiative, right? People don't want to join bigger organizations, bigger companies. People are very much against the government in a lot of cases. So this lines up perfectly to give people the freedom that they're looking for to really expand their own, abilities to earn and, engage in more productive ways.
And you're up in Cotopaxi.
So we're up there at 8,000 feet. Yeah.
Canyon City and Florence is rural.
Yeah.
Cotopaxi is rural.
Oh yeah, we're very rural. Yeah, we're just off the grid completely.
Yeah. So what was some of the mindset and thinking around investing into a rural area?
Well, family again. I have always thought that I was going to live in the woods.
Okay.
And so it's just kind of fulfillment of what I thought was going to happen or envision would happen. Now that I'm in the woods, I won't tell you that it's necessarily a forever thing. Whenever I envision my life, I say, well, you've lived a little over 50, you've got about 50 left. Is this it? Are you just going to be here? And that house will probably be there, and I'll probably return to it a lot. But I really do want to live overseas and be able to explore how that remote works, and then re-engage with Colorado along the way. That's kind of my vision for the next 50 years.
Yeah. That's always exciting to think about too. What's the next step? You've reached the thing that you thought that's what you're going to go to. It's like, I'm gonna get here.
Right. Yeah. Well, and now we should get our certificate of occupation within the next couple days for this house. So it feels like this is the building component of it is coming to a close. So I'm going to have to figure out how to make a little bit more money and look at my business model. But two, I'm going to have to start figuring out what it means to enjoy just living out in the woods. And that's going to be the hardest part for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just stepping back and saying, oh, wow, look, this is actually also quite gorgeous. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
I can stop looking at the 2x4s and I
Yeah.
can start admiring the view.
I should. I can, I should. Will I? And man, I need a reboot. That's what I need. But my brain needs a reboot right now. Yeah.
You're internalizing the rural reboot.
Yes.
So I'd say kind of to tie this conversation to a close here, what do you think would create the most significant challenges to the success of bringing tech jobs to rural areas? What do you think is the biggest solution to some of the biggest challenges that we have here?
Yeah, the challenge is how in this climate you get the education about what technology really is and can be for what you're doing, because you can still, deliver concrete to build sites and such up in the mountains, but that can be enhanced through technology in so many different ways at this point. Possibly for efficiency on how much you return to the to the cement plant or the concrete plant. So, there are so many different ways that we can think about how technology can enhance our lives and our work and our productivity and our freedom. And if you can kind of start helping people realize that, then we're on our way. We don't have to take these. We don't have to have a big tech company, although if they'd like to come down, nice. But but we don't have to have a big tech company to have technology in rural America. Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things that we had Joe Toscano on the podcast, and we're talking about rural areas because he also grew up in Nebraska and has this rural background, and he loves coming back to this area because there's a spark in this area. He grew up in, I think, Omaha. So, and going back and visiting family, he was like, yeah, there's such a different mindset in terms of technology of, we're not going to necessarily use that my way still works better. And in this area, I think we're coming to a realization that, technologies could be good. I think we can use this. And understanding that any kind of business ultimately becomes a tech business in some way, whether you're using a point of sales that is instead of the cash register that's beefy, you have a tablet that you use. There's such a shift now. Where do you see kind of the impacts of that shift especially in technology in rural areas?
I would hope that it leads to efficiency. And, at this point, the major cost in all these small businesses, especially the ones that involve driving or driving diesel trucks, is about fuel. So, I think what it leads to is more efficiency for all of us, and then hopefully that's savings, both to the environment and how much we need to use our vehicles, but just as importantly to our own pocketbooks. So that's why I would start employing technology in my own business. I'd be wanting to make more money and having more time for myself to go out and walk in the woods.
Exactly. Instead of you manually sending out the invoices, you could set up a system to send out those invoices. And that's an amount of time that is saved that you can put into other things, whether that's production or free time.
Right. And I hope that we're coming to the point where technology actually gives us that. I also hope that we're coming to the point where I think a lot of individuals work harder because they have the ability to get more done. So they spend more time at work.
Yeah.
And I would prefer personally to spend less time at work.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I
Yeah.
can now get more done because of technology. It's like, well, how much were you getting done before? Let's get about that much done or a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
and then use that other time to walk in the woods.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like you're trying to convince yourself with that too.
Oh, no, I don't. No, I'm
Jeff,
trying
you
to
need to walk in
convince
the woods.
Well, no, I just remember how computers actually came into our workplace. I had been living abroad for 4 years at that point.
Okay.
And the last stint was in rural China at a point where it was very underdeveloped.
Hmm.
We had an office. I was in the Peace Corps, and we had an office, and I heard that people would go into that office sometimes and send an email back to friends or family, but I never even experienced it until I moved back in 95, and I actually got a computer in my office. But I think everybody at that point thought, well, this is going to mean that we're going to have to work less hard. And it didn't end up being that computers made you work less hard. They made you work more or, get more done.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But we're entering a phase where as gig workers, the work will come into your life at midnight or any other time. If you let it. And I think that we definitely have to set up some boundaries associated.
I think that's a huge part of it too, is setting up those boundaries, because I know for me personally too, being a gig worker and having these experiences where I get an email at, like you said, midnight, and you have to make the decision, do I respond to it now or do I wait until the morning?
Yeah.
And that is a huge hurdle to get over mentally, because you could respond to it right now.
If you want, you can. And if that other person is in a different time zone where they're awake, they may kind of expect that. So it is hard. That one person I work for right now has meetings at 7 p.m. quite frequently. But if you're in the woods, it's been dark for 3 hours. Yeah. My eyes are starting to close a little bit and such. And then I've got to get on this meeting. And he's like, do you want to participate in all these meetings? I said, no, not the ones at 7 o'clock there. 7 p.m. I'm starting to really wind down by then.
Yeah. And it's such a change too. And final question here, where do you see kind of the impact when you do have a global workforce and you're empowering this global workforce, the time differences? Do you relate to everyone being on the same work schedule, or do you think it should be dispersed? Because I know my answer would be dispersion of that workforce. You can have a lot more work over a lot more time if you have that dispersion.
Yeah, well, I think that the impact is that good project managers or people who can coordinate the work that's being done toward a product that's significant and worth working toward, that's what's going to be needed. I mean, you can't all be in every meeting if you're spread across the globe in 24 different time zones. So it's just not possible. But if you have goals and objectives that you can all work toward to meet together, and you have agreed upon those, and you know what the timeline and the time frame is for all that, then it makes it doable, because the people who need to engage to move something forward or move the different components forward can engage together when they can coordinate it. So
yeah,
it just takes a lot more coordination.
Definitely.
But that's a job too.
It is. So what did you do with the Peace Corps?
Let's see. So I was an English teacher when I lived in rural China. And then later I came back to the Peace Corps as an operations manager, basically the director of operations for Peace Corps in Guyana, which northern South America, and then Guatemala after that. The fantastic jobs. The technology that allows us to interface and do everything we need to do is really helpful. But the best part of that job is really just working with the local staff that's engaged with, volunteers from America, and them learning about us as the best part of the whole thing is really that local staff, the local Peace Corps staff. They're fantastic wherever you go, and I really enjoyed being able to interact in those environments, deal with new management twists on your brain, new personal needs, because people from different cultures have different needs, and making those adjustments. It's really a great growth. It was a great growth opportunity for myself, anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're in the heat of that active learning, because you relearn a whole new culture.
You relearn everything. There's nothing that really gets done the same way.
Mm-hmm. What was like the biggest realization for you during that time?
I'm sure it had to do with privilege, but that privilege manifested itself in so many different ways. Like, in order to maintain me overseas in a place with low security, like Georgetown, Guyana, I had fences around my house, barbed wire and such. And so the embassy is so constantly involved with the security of personnel around the world. It's that realization of just what you give up to engage with that culture, and then are you a part of that culture? Are you not? How close are you to it? How much are you separated from it? When I lived in China, and it was similar. I mean, my security had been provided to me through the community college, or it was a teacher's college that I worked at. But basically, they had barred off the top 3 floors of a building for 3 volunteers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then they put a door person there, doorman, who watched everything we did, and watched everybody who came. And so, I mean, the biggest realization is that you just don't always get to engage with people in conversation at the same level that you're used to, or the same level that you want to get to. And you'll spend your whole time trying to get there with somebody, but it may never happen. Especially in a place like, China at that time in the countryside. It was crazy. I have other stories about what they did to surveil me, but I'll save them.
That's fascinating. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and hopping on the podcast with us.
You bet. Thank you so much, Sage.